The gunshot that tore through the Montana twilight wasn't meant for Tessa Walsh, but the bullet found her shoulder anyway, spinning her backward into the mud-churned street of Bozeman as chaos erupted around the stagecoach she just stepped down from. Blood soaked through her traveling dress, dark crimson spreading across the dusty blue fabric as she pressed her hand against the wound. The pain came in waves, sharp and burning, but what terrified her most was the thought that she'd made it this far only to die in some nameless street brawl before she could even begin her new life. The year was 1876, and Tessa had traveled from Boston with nothing but 2 worn carpetbags, and the hope that Montana territory might offer her the fresh start that Massachusetts never could. Strong hands lifted her from the ground as the shooting continued somewhere behind them. She caught a glimpse of a weathered face, dark eyes filled with concern beneath the brim of a dusty hat, and then she was being carried swiftly away from the violence. Her rescuer kicked open the door of what appeared to be a general store and laid her carefully on the counter. "Doc Miller." The man shouted, his voice deep and commanding. "Need you here now?" Tessa's vision swam, but she could make out more details of the man who'd saved her. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. His hands were gentle despite their size as he pressed a cloth against her wound. "Stay with me," he said, looking directly into her eyes. "What's your name?" "Tessa," she managed, her voice barely a whisper. "Tessa Walsh. I'm Wade Foster. You're going to be fine, Miss Walsh." "The doctor's coming." An elderly man with silver hair and spectacles hurried over, carrying a black medical bag. He examined her shoulder with practiced efficiency while Wade kept his hand on her uninjured arm, as if anchoring her to consciousness. "Bullet went clean through," Doc Miller announced. "Missed the bone. You're lucky, young lady. Whoever shot you had poor aim." "They weren't shooting at me," Tessa said through gritted teeth as the doctor began cleaning the wound. "2 men were arguing outside the saloon. I just got in the way." Wade's jaw tightened. Those would be the Morrison boys. Been drinking since noon, fighting over a card game. Sheriff's dealing with them now. The pain intensified as the doctor worked, and Tessa bit down hard on her lower lip to keep from crying out. Wade seemed to notice, and without asking permission, he took her hand in his. His palm was calloused and warm, and she found herself gripping it tightly as the doctor stitched her wound. "What brings you to Bozeman?" Wade asked, clearly trying to distract her from the medical procedure. "Work," Tessa said, focusing on his face rather than what the doctor was doing. "I was hired as a schoolteacher, supposed to start next week. You came all the way from back east to teach in Montana, Boston. I needed to get away." She didn't elaborate, and he didn't press. Doc Miller finished his work and wrapped her shoulder in clean bandages. "You'll need to keep this clean and dry. Change the dressing twice daily. No heavy lifting for at least 2 weeks. Where are you staying?" Wade asked as the doctor packed up his supplies. Tessa realized with a sinking feeling that she had no answer. "I was supposed to meet Mrs. Henderson at the boarding house, but I don't know where that is." "Margaret Henderson runs a place on 3rd Street, Doc Miller said, "but you're in no condition to walk there. Wade, you got your wagon." "Out front. I'll take her." Before Tessa could protest, Wade was helping her down from the counter. The room tilted dangerously, and she would have fallen if he hadn't wrapped an arm around her waist. She felt embarrassed by her weakness, by how much she had to lean against him as they made their way outside to his wagon. The evening air was cool against her flushed skin. Wade lifted her onto the wagon seat with surprising gentleness, then climbed up beside her and gathered the reins. As they rolled through the streets of Bozeman, Tessa took in her first real look at the town that was supposed to be her salvation. False-fronted buildings lined the main street, their wooden facades painted in faded colors. Signs advertised everything from dry goods to whiskey to livestock supplies. Men in dusty work clothes and women in practical calico dresses went about their evening business, and in the distance, the Bridger Mountains rose against the darkening sky like sentinels. "It's beautiful," Tessa said softly. Wade glanced at her in surprise. "Most folks from back east think it's rough and uncivilized. I've had enough of civilization." The words came out more bitter than she intended. He didn't respond, but she felt him studying her in the fading light. They turned onto a quieter street where modest houses sat behind white picket fences. Wade pulled the wagon to a stop in front of a two-story building with a sign that read, "Henderson's Boarding House for Respectable Ladies." A plump woman with graying hair came bustling out before Wade could help Tessa down. "Mercy, what happened? You must be Miss Walsh. I was expecting you on the evening stage." "She was on it," Wade said. "Got caught in some crossfire from the Morrison brothers' latest dispute." "Mrs. Henderson clucked her tongue disapprovingly as she helped Tessa down from the wagon. "Those boys are nothing but trouble. Come inside, dear. You look ready to collapse." Tessa turned to thank Wade, but Mrs. Henderson was already ushering her through the front door. She caught one last glimpse of him standing beside his wagon, hat in hand, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. The boarding house was warm and clean, with floral wallpaper and the smell of fresh bread lingering in the air. Mrs. Henderson led her upstairs to a small but tidy room with a brass bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the street. "You rest now," the older woman said kindly. "I'll bring you some supper on a tray. Tomorrow will be soon enough to discuss the teaching position and get you settled properly." After Mrs. Henderson left, Tessa sank onto the bed, suddenly overwhelmed by exhaustion and the events of the past few hours. She'd left Boston 3 weeks ago, fleeing a scandal that had destroyed her reputation and any hope of a future there. Her engagement to Charles Pemberton had ended when his family discovered that her father had embezzled funds from his business partner before dying of a heart attack. Never mind that Tessa had known nothing about it. Never mind that she'd spent the last year of her life caring for her invalid mother until consumption claimed her too. The Pembertons had withdrawn their son's proposal immediately, and Boston society had turned its back on her with ruthless efficiency. Teaching in Montana Territory was supposed to be her chance to start over where no one knew about her father's crimes or her broken engagement. She'd imagined arriving in Bozeman with dignity, making a good first impression on the town that would be her new home. Instead, she'd been shot within minutes of stepping off the stage, but Wade Foster had saved her. She found herself thinking about his strong hands, his steady voice, the way he'd held her hand while the doctor worked. He'd been kind without being condescending, concerned without being intrusive. In Boston, men like Charles had treated her like a delicate ornament, pretty to look at but ultimately useless. Wade had treated her like a person. She was still thinking about him when sleep finally claimed her. The next morning, Tessa woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the sound of voices downstairs. Her shoulder throbbed, but the pain was manageable. She dressed carefully, choosing a simple green dress that buttoned up the front, making it easier to manage with one arm still stiff. Downstairs, she found Mrs. Henderson serving breakfast to several other boarders, all women of various ages. They looked up with friendly curiosity as Tessa entered the dining room. "How are you feeling, dear?" Mrs. Henderson asked, pulling out a chair for her. "Much better, thank you." "This is Miss Walsh, our new schoolteacher," Mrs. Henderson announced to the room. "She had quite an eventful arrival yesterday." The women introduced themselves. There was young Sarah Collins, who worked at the millinery shop, Emily Grant, a widow who took in sewing, and two sisters, Prudence and Charity Miller, the doctor's daughters who worked as nurses. "We heard about the shooting," Prudence said, her eyes wide with concern. "Our father said Wade Foster brought you in. He's one of the finest men in the territory. Owns the Three Pines Ranch about 5 miles out of town," Charity added. "He was in buying supplies when it happened. Lucky for you." Tessa felt her cheeks warm at the interest in the other women's voices. "He was very kind. Wade's always been a gentleman," Mrs. Henderson said, setting a plate of eggs and toast in front of Tessa. "Lost his wife in childbirth 4 years ago. Terrible tragedy. The baby died too. He's been alone at that ranch ever since, except for his ranch hands." Tessa's heart clenched at this information. She thought about the sadness she'd glimpsed in Wade's dark eyes and suddenly understood its source. After breakfast, Mrs. Henderson walked her to the schoolhouse, a modest building at the edge of town with rows of wooden desks and a blackboard at the front. The previous teacher had married and moved to California, leaving the position vacant. "We have about 20 students ranging from 6 to 14, Mrs. Henderson explained. "Most are children of ranchers and shopkeepers. They're good kids, though some of the older boys can be rowdy." Tessa spent the morning organizing the classroom and reviewing the lesson plans the previous teacher had left behind. Despite her injured shoulder, she felt a sense of purpose beginning to take root. This was something she was good at, something that belonged to her alone. She was arranging books on a shelf when she heard the schoolhouse door open. Turning, she found Wade Foster standing in the doorway, hat in hand. "Mr. Foster," she said, surprised. "I didn't expect to see you again." "I wanted to check on how you're healing," he said, stepping inside. In the daylight, she could see him more clearly. He was perhaps 30 years old, with strong features and lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. He wore work clothes, denim pants and a cotton shirt, both clean but well worn. "I'm doing well. Thank you for yesterday. I never properly thanked you for helping me." "No thanks needed. Anyone would have done the same. But you're the one who did it." She moved toward him, wincing slightly as the motion pulled at her shoulder. He noticed immediately. "You should still be resting." "I can't rest. School starts in a few days and I need to prepare." Wade looked around the classroom, taking in the neat rows of desks, the alphabet posted above the blackboard, the stack of primers on her desk. "You planning to teach all these grades yourself? That's the job." "That's a lot of work for one person, especially someone still recovering from a bullet wound." "I'll manage. I always do." Something in her tone made him look at her more closely. "You're used to managing on your own." It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. "I've had to be." An awkward silence fell between them. Tessa busied herself straightening books that didn't need straightening, suddenly aware of how close he was standing. "I should get back to my ranch," Wade said finally. "But if you need anything at all, the Three Pines is about 5 miles north of town. Anyone can point you in the right direction." "Thank you, Mr. Foster." "Wade," he corrected. "Out here we don't stand much on formality." "Then you should call me Tessa." He smiled, a slow, warm expression that transformed his serious face. "Tessa it is." After he left, the schoolhouse seemed quieter somehow. Tessa tried to focus on her preparations, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the rancher with the sad eyes and gentle hands. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Her shoulder healed quickly, though Doc Miller warned her against overdoing it. She met more of the townspeople, including the sheriff, a gruff but fair man named Tom Clayton, who apologized profusely for the shooting incident. The Morrison brothers, he informed her, had been fined and banned from carrying weapons in town for 6 months. School began on a crisp September Monday. Tessa stood at the front of the classroom, facing 20 pairs of curious eyes, and felt her nervousness evaporate. This was what she was meant to do. The children ranged from little Emma Parker, barely 6 years old with blonde braids, to Jack Sullivan, a lanky 14-year-old who clearly thought he was too old for school. She established rules, assigned seats, and began with a simple arithmetic lesson to assess their skill levels. By the end of the day, she was exhausted but satisfied. Teaching these children felt like coming home to a place she'd never been before. As the students filed out, a girl of about 12 lingered behind. She had dark hair and eyes that reminded Tessa of someone, though she couldn't immediately place who. "Miss Walsh," the girl said hesitantly. "I'm Lucy Foster. Wade Foster is my uncle, of course. That's why she looked familiar." She had Wade's eyes. "It's nice to meet you, Lucy. You did excellent work today in geography." The girl beamed. "Thank you, madam. Uncle Wade says education is important, especially for girls. He makes sure I come to school every day, even when there's work at the ranch." "Your uncle sounds like a wise man. He's the best," Lucy said with fierce loyalty. "He took me in when my parents died of fever 2 years ago. I don't know what would have happened to me if he hadn't." Tessa felt her heart squeeze. Wade had lost his wife and child, and then his brother or sister and their spouse. Yet he'd opened his home to his orphaned niece. What kind of man did that? Over the following weeks, Tessa settled into a routine. She taught Monday through Friday, spent Saturdays preparing lessons and helping Mrs. Henderson around the boarding house, and Sundays attending church services in the small white chapel on Main Street. The townspeople had accepted her warmly, and she was beginning to feel like she might actually belong somewhere for the first time since her parents' deaths. She saw Wade occasionally when he came to town for supplies. He always tipped his hat and asked how she was doing, but their conversations were brief. Still, she found herself looking for him, disappointed on the days when he didn't appear. Lucy became one of her favorite students. The girl was bright and eager to learn, with a particular talent for mathematics. She often stayed after school to help Tessa clean the classroom, and during these times, she talked about life on the ranch. "Uncle Wade works so hard," Lucy said one afternoon in late October as she wiped down the blackboard. "He's up before dawn every day, tending to the cattle and horses. We have 6 ranch hands, but Uncle Wade does more work than any of them. It sounds like a difficult life." "It is, but he loves it. He says the land gets in your blood, that once you've lived under this big Montana sky, anywhere else feels too small." Lucy paused, then added quietly, "He's lonely, though. He doesn't say it, but I can tell." Tessa didn't know how to respond to that, so she changed the subject. But Lucy's words stayed with her. The first snow came in early November, transforming Bozeman into a winter wonderland. Tessa stood at her boarding house window, watching fat flakes drift down from a gray sky, and felt a pang of homesickness for Boston. She'd never particularly loved the city, but it had been familiar. This vast Montana landscape still felt foreign sometimes, beautiful but intimidating. She was preparing for bed when Mrs. Henderson knocked on her door. "Tessa, dear, there's someone downstairs asking for you." Puzzled, she followed the older woman down to find Wade Foster standing in the parlor, his coat dusted with snow. He looked worried. "Is something wrong?" Tessa asked immediately. "It's Lucy. She's sick. Started this afternoon with a high fever and cough. Doc Miller's at the ranch now, but she keeps asking for you, says you're her favorite teacher and she wants you there." He twisted his hat in his hands. "I know it's a lot to ask, especially with the snow, but if you could come, just for a little while, it might comfort her." "Of course," Tessa said without hesitation. "Let me get my coat." The ride to the Three Pines Ranch was cold and uncomfortable. Snow swirled around them as Wade's horse pulled the wagon through increasingly deep drifts. He'd brought blankets, which Tessa wrapped around herself, but the wind still cut through. "I'm sorry to drag you out in this weather," Wade said, his eyes on the road ahead. "Don't apologize. Lucy's a wonderful girl. I'm glad she thought of me." They arrived at the ranch after what felt like hours but was probably only 45 minutes. The main house was a sprawling structure built of logs and stone, with smoke curling from 2 chimneys. Warm light glowed from the windows, welcoming against the dark and snow. Inside, the house was surprisingly cozy. Wooden floors were covered with colorful rugs, and a massive stone fireplace dominated one wall of the main room. Doc Miller met them at the door. "Her fever's high, but I don't think it's anything more serious than influenza," he said. "Keep her warm, give her plenty of fluids and these fever powders every 4 hours. She should be better in a few days." After the doctor left, Wade led Tessa upstairs to a small bedroom where Lucy lay in bed, her face flushed with fever. The girl's eyes lit up when she saw Tessa. "Miss Walsh, you came." "Of course I came." Tessa sat on the edge of the bed and felt Lucy's forehead. Hot, but not dangerously so. "Your uncle said you wanted to see me. Will you read to me?" "Uncle Wade reads, but he doesn't do the voices like you do." Tessa smiled. "What would you like to hear?" Lucy pointed to a worn copy of Little Women on her bedside table. Tessa settled into the chair beside the bed and began to read, doing different voices for each of the March sisters. Wade leaned against the door frame, watching. Lucy's eyes grew heavy after a few chapters, and soon she was asleep. Tessa closed the book quietly and stood, careful not to wake her. "Thank you," Wade whispered as they stepped into the hallway. "That's the most peaceful she's been since she got sick. She's a special girl. She is. She's been through so much, lost so many people. I worry about her." They stood in the dimly lit hallway, and Tessa realized how close they were standing. She could see the concern etched on Wade's face, the love he had for his niece evident in every line. "She's lucky to have you," Tessa said softly. "I'm the lucky one. After Julia died, after the baby, I thought I'd never care about anything again. Then my brother and his wife got sick, and suddenly I had Lucy depending on me. She gave me a reason to keep going. It was the most personal thing he'd ever shared with her, and Tessa felt the weight of his trust. I understand loss. Both my parents died within 2 years of each other. My father first, then my mother. I was alone too." "Is that why you came west?" She hesitated, then decided he deserved honesty. "Partly. I was also running from a scandal. My father did something terrible before he died, stole money from his business partner. I didn't know about it until after, but it didn't matter. I was tainted by association. My fiancé's family ended our engagement. Society decided I was as guilty as my father. Coming here was my chance to start over where no one knew." Wade's expression didn't change, didn't show the judgment or disgust she'd feared. "Your father's choices aren't your burden to carry. Try telling that to the good people of Boston. You're not in Boston anymore." The simple statement felt like absolution. Tessa felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back quickly. "I should check on Lucy again," Wade said, seeming to sense her need for a moment to compose herself. "Then I'll make us some coffee. Something tells me this is going to be a long night." He was right. Lucy's fever spiked around midnight, and they took turns placing cool cloths on her forehead and coaxing her to drink water. By dawn, the fever had broken, and she was sleeping peacefully. Tessa stood at the kitchen window, watching the sun rise over the snow-covered landscape. The storm had passed, leaving everything blanketed in white. It was breathtakingly beautiful. "Coffee." Wade appeared beside her, holding 2 steaming cups. "Thank you." She accepted one gratefully, wrapping her cold hands around the warm ceramic. They drank in comfortable silence, watching the day brighten. One of Wade's ranch hands appeared from the bunkhouse and began trudging toward the barn. "I should get you back to town," Wade said. "Folks will talk if you stay here much longer." "Let them talk. I'm more concerned about Lucy." "She'll be fine now. The fever breaking is a good sign." Still, Tessa insisted on looking in on the girl one more time before leaving. Lucy was awake, looking pale but much better. "Don't worry about school," Tessa told her. "You focus on getting well. I'll bring your assignments by in a few days." The ride back to town was quiet. Tessa dozed against Wade's shoulder, too tired to worry about propriety. When they arrived at the boarding house, he helped her down from the wagon. "Thank you," he said, "for coming, for staying, for everything." "You don't need to thank me. Lucy matters to me." He looked like he wanted to say something else, but Mrs. Henderson appeared at the door, concern written all over her face. "Tessa, I was so worried. When you didn't come home last night, I feared the worst." Tessa hurried to explain about Lucy's illness, and Mrs. Henderson's expression softened. But as Wade drove away, Tessa caught the speculative look in the older woman's eyes and knew that the town gossips would have plenty to talk about. She was right. Over the next few days, she became aware of whispers and sideways glances. Nothing overt, just a subtle shift in how people looked at her. She ignored it, focusing on her students and her work. Lucy returned to school after a week, still a bit pale but recovering well. She slipped Tessa a note during class that read, "Thank you for taking care of me. Uncle Wade hasn't stopped talking about how kind you were." The words made Tessa's heart flutter in a way she tried not to examine too closely. December arrived with more snow and bitter cold. The school held a Christmas program, with students reciting poems and performing songs. Tessa was surprised and pleased when Wade attended, sitting in the back row and applauding enthusiastically when Lucy recited a long passage from A Christmas Carol. After the program, families gathered for cake and cider. Wade approached Tessa as she was cleaning up. "That was wonderful," he said. "Lucy's been practicing her recitation for weeks. She did beautifully. You must be proud." "I am." He paused, then continued, "Christmas is next week. We're having a small celebration at the ranch, just Lucy, the ranch hands, and their families. We'd be honored if you'd join us." Tessa knew she should say no. The gossip about them was already starting to circulate, fed by her overnight stay at his ranch. Spending Christmas there would only add fuel to the fire. But when she looked into his hopeful eyes, she couldn't bring herself to refuse. "I'd love to come." His smile was worth whatever talk it might cause. Christmas at the Three Pines Ranch was unlike anything Tessa had experienced in Boston. Where her family's celebrations had been formal and restrained, this was warm and rowdy. The ranch hands and their families filled the main room with laughter and music. Someone had cut down a small pine tree and decorated it with strings of popcorn and paper ornaments the children had made. Lucy pulled Tessa aside to show her the gift she'd made for Wade, a leather bookmark she'd tooled herself with a pattern of pine trees. "Do you think he'll like it?" she asked anxiously. "He'll love it because you made it with such care." When the gift-giving began, Tessa was surprised to find Wade handing her a package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. Inside was a beautiful shawl, soft wool dyed a deep forest green. "I noticed you were always cold," he said quietly. "Thought this might help. It's lovely. Thank you." She hadn't expected a gift and felt embarrassed that she had nothing to give him in return. As if reading her thoughts, he said, "Having you here is gift enough." Later, after the festivities had wound down and the ranch hands had returned to their families, Lucy went to bed, leaving Tessa and Wade alone in the main room. The fire crackled softly, and snow fell gently outside the windows. "I should probably head back to town," Tessa said, though she made no move to stand from her comfortable spot on the sofa. "Storm's picking up again. You should wait until it passes." They sat in silence for a while, watching the flames dance in the fireplace. Tessa felt peaceful in a way she hadn't in years, as if this rustic ranch house in the middle of Montana was somehow more home than anywhere she'd lived before. "Can I ask you something?" Wade said eventually. "Of course." "Why teaching? A woman like you could have done anything." "A woman like me," she raised an eyebrow. "Educated, refined, from a good family back east." "From a disgraced family, you mean. And I teach because it's the only thing I'm good at, the only thing that makes me feel like I matter." "You matter," Wade said firmly. "You matter to Lucy, to all your students, to this whole town. You matter to me." The last words hung in the air between them. Tessa's heart raced as Wade shifted closer to her on the sofa. "Wade," she began, but didn't know how to finish. "I know I shouldn't say this," he continued, his voice low and earnest. "I know you've only been here a few months, and I know my life isn't what you're used to, but I can't stop thinking about you, Tessa. Haven't been able to since the day I carried you into that store." "I think about you too," she admitted. "More than I should." He reached for her hand, enfolding it in both of his. "I'm not a man who's good with words. I spent 4 years after Julia died telling myself I'd never let anyone close again, that it hurt too much to love and lose. But then you came along and everything changed." Tessa's throat tightened with emotion. "Wade, I care about you, but I can't be the woman you need. I don't know anything about ranching or this life. I'm a teacher from Boston who can barely ride a horse. You deserve someone who can be a true partner in the life you've built." "You're already the woman I want," Wade said, his eyes intense. "I don't need someone who knows about cattle and horses. I have ranch hands for that. I need someone who makes me laugh again, who's kind to my niece, who sees the beauty in a Montana sunrise. I need you, Tessa, exactly as you are." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "What if I disappoint you? What if I'm not strong enough for this life? You're the strongest woman I know. You left everything familiar behind to start over in a place where you knew no one. You got shot on your first day here and were back on your feet teaching school a week later. You don't give yourself enough credit. But I come with scandal, with a past that could reflect badly on you. I don't care about your past. I care about you, about us, about the future we could build together." He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently wiping away her tears. "I'm not asking you to give up teaching or change who you are. I'm just asking you to let me love you, to see if maybe you could love me back." "I already do," Tessa whispered. "I love you, Wade. I'm terrified of it, but I do." He kissed her then, soft and sweet, and Tessa felt something inside her that had been frozen since her father's death begin to thaw. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. "Marry me," Wade said. "I know it's fast, but I'm not a young man anymore, and I know what I want. Marry me, Tessa Walsh. Be my wife, Lucy's aunt, the mother of whatever children we might have together. Build a life with me here in Montana." Tessa thought about everything she'd be agreeing to. The harsh winters, the isolation, the hard work of ranch life. She thought about the gossip and the judgment that might follow her even here. But then she looked into Wade's eyes and saw love and acceptance and a future bright with possibility. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you." His whoop of joy brought Lucy running from her bedroom, and when the girl saw them embracing, she started jumping up and down with excitement. "Does this mean Miss Walsh is going to be my aunt?" she squealed. "If she can put up with us," Wade said, laughing. "If I can put up with you," Tessa said. "I think the question is whether you can put up with me." "Every day for the rest of my life," Wade promised. They were married in late January of 1877 in the small church in Bozeman. The whole town turned out for the wedding, and if there were any who still whispered about scandal or impropriety, their voices were drowned out by the well-wishers. Tessa wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Henderson helped her make, and Lucy served as her bridesmaid, beaming with pride. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife and Wade kissed her, Tessa felt like she was finally, truly home. Moving to the ranch was an adjustment. The house was large and drafty compared to the boarding house, and there was always work to be done. But Wade was patient, showing her how things worked and never making her feel inadequate when she struggled. Lucy helped too, teaching her how to collect eggs from the chickens and churn butter. Tessa continued teaching, rising before dawn to help with morning chores before Wade drove her into town. It was exhausting, but she loved both her lives, the quiet satisfaction of ranch work and the joy of educating her students. The first real test of their marriage came in March when a late-season blizzard struck. The snow came down so hard that visibility dropped to nothing, and the temperature plummeted. Wade and his men worked around the clock to move the cattle to shelter and keep them from freezing. Tessa spent 3 days barely seeing her husband, just making sure he had hot food and dry clothes when he stumbled in from the cold. She was frightened by the severity of the storm, terrified that Wade or one of his men might get lost in the whiteout and freeze to death. On the third night, after Wade had finally gotten all the cattle to safety and collapsed into bed beside her, she broke down crying. "I was so scared," she sobbed against his chest. "I thought I might lose you." Hey," he murmured, pulling her close despite his own exhaustion. "I'm fine." "We're all fine. The cattle made it through too. I don't know how you do this, how you live with this constant worry and danger. Because it's worth it. This land, this life, you and Lucy, it's all worth it." He kissed her forehead. "And having you here waiting for me, knowing you're safe and warm, that gave me the strength to keep going. I want to be stronger for you. You are strong. You kept this household running while I was out there. You took care of Lucy when she was scared. You had hot food and coffee ready every time we came in. That's strength, Tessa. Don't sell yourself short." Spring arrived eventually, transforming the harsh white landscape into something green and alive. Wildflowers bloomed across the meadows, and new calves wobbled after their mothers on uncertain legs. Tessa found herself falling in love with the ranch, with the rhythms of the seasons and the satisfaction of watching things grow. In May, she discovered she was pregnant. She told Wade one evening after Lucy had gone to bed, nervous about his reaction given what had happened with his first wife. His face went pale. "Are you sure?" The doctor confirmed it yesterday. "And you're okay, you're healthy." "I'm fine, Wade. Doc Miller says I'm strong and healthy, that there's no reason to think anything will go wrong." He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. When he finally released her, she saw tears on his face. "I never thought I'd have this chance again," he said hoarsely. "A wife I love, a child on the way. After losing Julia and the baby, I thought God was punishing me for something. This is a blessing, not a punishment. We're being given a second chance." The pregnancy was difficult at times. Morning sickness plagued her through the first few months, and as summer arrived, the heat made her miserable. But Wade was attentive and loving, always making sure she was comfortable and had everything she needed. Lucy was thrilled about the baby, constantly talking to Tessa's growing belly and making plans for all the things she'd teach her new cousin. She'd started calling Tessa Aunt Tessa shortly after the wedding, and the title had stuck. In August, Tessa made the difficult decision to take a leave from teaching. Her replacement was a young man fresh from a teacher's college in Chicago, And while Tessa felt a pang watching someone else take over her classroom, she knew it was the right choice. She'd return after the baby was old enough, she told herself. The school board had promised to hold her position. September brought cooler weather and the beginning of harvest season. Tessa helped where she could, mostly with cooking for the ranch hands during the busy days. Her belly was large now, and she moved slowly, but she refused to be completely idle. One evening in late September, she and Wade sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Lucy was inside practicing her arithmetic, and the ranch was quiet except for the occasional lowing of cattle. "You ever regret it?" Wade asked suddenly. "Giving up your old life, marrying me, being stuck out here?" Tessa looked at him in surprise. "Stuck? Is that what you think?" "I know this isn't what you imagined for yourself when you were growing up in Boston." "You're right. It's not. What I imagined was a loveless marriage to a man who valued my family connections more than me. I imagined a life of tea parties and social obligations and constant judgment. This life, Wade, this is so much better than anything I ever dreamed of. Even with the hard work and the isolation and the danger, especially with all of that. Because I'm living, really living, not just existing in a gilded cage. And I'm doing it with a man I love more than I thought possible." He kissed her then, sweet and tender, and Tessa felt their baby kick between them. Wade laughed and placed his hand on her belly, marveling at the movement. "Boy or girl, what do you think?" he asked. "I don't care as long as they're healthy, me either." Their son was born on a cold October night during the first snowfall of the season. Doc Miller and his daughters attended the birth, while Wade paced downstairs, and Lucy tried to distract him by reading aloud from one of her school books. The labor was long and painful, and there were moments when Tessa was certain she wouldn't survive it. But Prudence, Miller held her hand and encouraged her, and finally, after hours of struggle, she heard the most beautiful sound in the world, her baby's first cry. "It's a boy," Doc Miller announced, placing the tiny, squalling bundle in her arms. "A healthy, strong boy." Tessa looked down at her son, taking in his red face and shock of dark hair, and felt overwhelmed by love. Wade burst into the room moments later, his face anxious until he saw them both alive and well. "A son," he breathed, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed. "We have a son." They named him William James Foster, after Wade's father and Tessa's. Little Will, as they called him, had his father's dark eyes and his mother's delicate features. He was a good baby, sleeping well and nursing eagerly, and Wade was besotted from the first moment. Lucy adored her new cousin, constantly wanting to hold him and help care for him. Tessa watched her husband with their son and saw the healing of old wounds, the fear from losing his first child slowly being replaced by joy. Winter settled over the ranch, but inside the house, there was warmth and happiness. Tessa had never felt so content. She had a husband who loved her, a daughter in Lucy who'd claimed a place in her heart, and a beautiful son who depended on her completely. One evening in December, as they decorated the Christmas tree with Will sleeping in a cradle nearby and Lucy stringing popcorn, Wade pulled Tessa aside. "A year ago I was alone except for Lucy, going through the motions of living but not really alive. Now look at us. We're a family." "We are," Tessa agreed, leaning against him. "I love you, Tessa Foster. More every day, I love you too." Life on the ranch fell into new rhythms. Tessa cared for Will during the day while Wade worked, and in the evenings, they'd sit together as a family, reading or talking or simply enjoying each other's company. Lucy continued to excel in school and often helped Tessa with the baby. As Will grew into a rambunctious toddler, Tessa began to think about returning to teaching. The school board had kept their promise, holding her position, and the temporary teacher was planning to move on. but she found herself conflicted. She missed the classroom, missed her students, but she also loved being home with Will and being fully present for Lucy. She discussed it with Wade one night after the children were asleep. "What do you want to do?" he asked. "I don't know. I love teaching, but I love being here too. I feel torn." "Then don't choose. What if you taught part-time, 3 days a week instead of 5? We could afford to hire help around the house if you needed it." It was the perfect solution. By the fall of 1878, Tessa was back in the classroom 3 days a week, with Mrs. Henderson's niece coming to the ranch to help with Will on those days. It wasn't the conventional arrangement, but it worked for them. The years passed in a blur of happiness and growth. Lucy graduated from school at 15 and surprised everyone by announcing she wanted to attend the new teaching college that had opened in Helena. Wade and Tessa were proud and supportive, even though it meant she'd be far from home. Will grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books as much as horses. In 1881, Tessa gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Julia Grace, after Wade's first wife. Wade had been hesitant about the name at first, but Tessa insisted. "She was part of your life, part of what made you who you are. We should honor her memory." Little Julia was the opposite of her brother, loud and fearless where he was quiet and cautious. She kept them all on their toes, and Wade often joked that she'd inherited her mother's stubborn streak. As 1883 dawned, Tessa looked around at the life she'd built and marveled at how far she'd come. She was 30 years old, the wife of a successful rancher, mother to 2 children, and stepmother to Lucy, who was now studying to be a teacher herself. She taught 3 days a week and spent the rest of her time managing the household and helping Wade with the ranch. The scandal that had driven her from Boston seemed like a lifetime ago, something that had happened to a different person. She rarely thought about Charles Pemberton or the judgmental society that had cast her out. They'd done her a favor, really, pushing her toward a life she never would have chosen, but that had turned out to be exactly what she needed. One spring evening, she and Wade sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard. Will was 7 now, carefully explaining something to 3-year-old Julia, who was listening with rapt attention. "Remember when you said you couldn't be the woman I needed?" Wade asked. Tessa smiled. "And you said I was already the woman you wanted." "I was right. You've exceeded every hope I had. You're an amazing mother, a wonderful teacher, a true partner. You make me better, Tessa. You make all our lives better." "You saved me," she said softly. "Not just from that bullet, but from a life that would have slowly killed my spirit. You gave me freedom and love and purpose. You gave me everything." We saved each other. It was true. They'd both been broken in different ways, both running from pain and loss. But somehow, in finding each other, they'd found healing and hope. Lucy came home in the summer of 1884, freshly graduated from teaching college, and engaged to a young lawyer she'd met in Helena. The wedding was held at the ranch in August, a joyful celebration that brought friends and family from across Montana territory. Watching Lucy marry her Thomas, Tessa felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This girl who'd lost so much had found happiness and love. She was going to be a teacher, following in Tessa's footsteps, and Tessa couldn't have been prouder. More years passed. Will grew tall and serious, showing an interest in ranching that pleased Wade immensely. Julia remained wild and spirited, equally comfortable in a dress or work clothes, riding horses as well as any ranch hand by the time she was 8. In 1887, Tessa found herself pregnant again, a surprise given that she was now 34. This pregnancy was harder than the others, and Doc Miller, now quite elderly, warned her to take it easy. Wade hovered constantly, worried despite her reassurances that she was fine. Their third child, another boy they named Thomas Daniel, was born in January of 1888 during one of the worst blizzards in Montana's history. Tessa labored while the wind howled outside and snow piled against the windows. Doc Miller couldn't make it through the storm, so Prudence Miller, now an experienced midwife, attended the birth with Wade's help. It was terrifying and painful. But when Tessa held her tiny son afterward, she knew she'd do it all again in a heartbeat. "That's it," Wade said firmly, holding Thomas with tears streaming down his face. "No more babies. I can't go through this again. I thought I was going to lose you. I'm fine and he's perfect. Promise me, Tessa, no more," she promised, knowing he was right. 3 children were more than enough, and the birth had taken a lot out of her. Thomas was a happy baby, easier than either of his siblings had been. Will, now 12, took his role as big brother seriously, always watching over the baby. Julia, at 7, was less interested in the infant and more interested in helping Wade with the ranch work. Life settled once more into familiar patterns. Tessa continued teaching, though she cut back to 2 days a week. The school now had 2 teachers, and the younger woman handled the heavier load while Tessa focused on the older students. Lucy and her husband Thomas visited regularly, and in 1889 they welcomed their own daughter, making Tessa and Wade grandparents at 36 and 43, respectively. Holding her granddaughter Sarah for the first time, Tessa marveled at the completeness of her life. The 1890s brought changes to Montana. Railroads expanded, bringing more settlers and commerce. Bozeman grew from a frontier town into a real city. The territory gained statehood in 1889, becoming the 41st state in the Union. Through it all, the Three Pines Ranch remained constant, a haven of stability in a changing world. Wade expanded their holdings, buying neighboring land when it became available. Will worked beside his father, learning the ranching business. Julia announced at 14 that she wanted to attend college and become a veterinarian, a shocking ambition for a girl, but one that Tessa and Wade supported wholeheartedly. Thomas grew into a sweet-natured boy who loved music and showed talent with the violin. Wade built him a small studio where he could practice without disturbing the household, and Tessa arranged for lessons with a retired orchestra musician who'd settled in Bozeman. In 1895, Tessa celebrated her 20th anniversary with Wade, 20 years since that fateful day when a stray bullet had brought them together. They held a party at the ranch, inviting everyone who'd been part of their journey. Mrs. Henderson, now quite elderly but still sharp as a tack, Doc Miller's daughters and their families, Lucy and Thomas with their 3 children, ranch hands who'd been with them for decades. As Tessa looked around at the gathering, at the life she and Wade had built together, she felt profound gratitude. She'd left Boston as a disgraced woman with nothing but shame and a teaching certificate. She'd arrived in Montana territory expecting only survival. Instead, she'd found love and family and belonging. Will married in 1896 at 22, bringing home a smart, capable young woman named Anna who fit seamlessly into the ranch family. They moved into a house Wade built for them on the ranch property. And soon Anna was pregnant with the first of what would be many great-grandchildren for Tessa and Wade. Julia left for college in 1897, heading to Colorado, where a new veterinary program accepted women. Tessa worried about her daughter being so far from home, but Wade reminded her that they'd raised Julia to be independent and strong. "She's like her mother," he said. "She'll do great things." Thomas continued his music studies, and by 1899, at 11 years old, he was good enough to play in the Bozeman Community Orchestra. Watching him perform, Tessa felt the same pride she'd felt watching Lucy graduate from teaching college and will take over more responsibility on the ranch. As the new century approached, Tessa found herself reflective. She was 46 years old, her hair showing streaks of gray, her hands marked by years of work. But she'd never felt more beautiful or more valued. Wade had aged too, his dark hair now mostly silver, his face more lined. But to her, he was as handsome as the day he'd carried her into Doc Miller's office with a bullet in her shoulder. On New Year's Eve, 1899, as Montana prepared to enter the 20th century, they stood together on their porch watching fireworks over Bozeman in the distance. Will and Anna were in their own house with their 2 children. Thomas was asleep inside. Lucy's family was in Helena, and Julia was still at school in Colorado. 24 years, Wade said, pulling Tessa close against the cold. 24 years since you walked into my life. Best 24 years of my life, Tessa said. Mine too. I love you, Tessa Foster. I'll love you into the next century and beyond, and I'll love you right back. They kissed as midnight struck, celebrating not just a new century, but a love that had endured and deepened through years of joy and struggle, triumph and loss. The early years of the new century brought more changes. Will and Anna had 4 children in quick succession, filling the ranch with young voices. Julia graduated from veterinary school in 1903 and returned to Montana, opening a practice in Bozeman that served ranchers throughout the valley. She never married, claiming she was too busy and too independent to tie herself down, and Tessa admired her daughter's certainty. Thomas's musical talent took him to San Francisco in 1906 to study at a prestigious conservatory. He was there when the great earthquake struck, and Tessa spent weeks in terror before receiving a telegram that he was alive and unharmed. He came home shortly after, shaken by the experience, and decided to stay in Montana, teaching music and performing locally. Lucy's children grew up, and 2 of them became teachers themselves, carrying on the family tradition. Lucy often joked that Tessa had started a dynasty of educators. Wade's health began to decline in 1908. He was 62 and had worked hard his entire life. His joints ached in the cold and he tired more easily. But he refused to slow down completely, still riding out to check on the cattle even when Will begged him to rest. "I'll rest when I'm dead," he'd say stubbornly, and Tessa would scold him for being foolish. In truth, she understood. The ranch was his life, the work that gave him purpose. Taking that away would be like asking him to stop breathing. They celebrated their 30th anniversary in 1905 with a huge gathering at the ranch. All their children and grandchildren came, along with friends from across Montana. It was a testament to the life they'd built, the community they'd created. That night, alone in their room, Wade held Tessa close. 30 years. Sometimes it feels like 30 days, other times like 300, but every single day has been a gift, even the hard ones. Especially the hard ones. They made us stronger. Tessa thought about all they'd weathered together. Harsh winters and summer droughts, sick children and financial struggles, the death of friends and the joy of new life. Through it all, they'd stood together, partners in every sense of the word. In 1910, Lucy's husband Thomas died suddenly of a heart attack. Tessa watched her stepdaughter grieve and remembered her own losses, how Wade had been there to support her. She tried to do the same for Lucy, who eventually found her way back to peace if not happiness. Wade's health continued to decline through 1911 and 1912. He developed a persistent cough that worried Doc Miller's daughter Charity, now the town's primary physician. But he refused to be confined to bed, insisting on staying active for as long as possible. Tessa spent these years treasuring every moment. They'd take slow walks around the ranch property, Wade pointing out changes and remembering how things used to be. They'd sit on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over the mountains they both loved. "No regrets," Wade told her one evening. "I want you to know that. Not a single regret about any of it. Me either. You gave me everything I never knew I needed. We gave each other everything." Will had taken over most of the ranch operations by this point, running things with the same dedication his father had shown. Anna was a gracious presence, managing the main house and caring for Wade when Tessa needed a break. In the spring of 1913, Wade's cough worsened, and he developed pneumonia. Charity visited daily, doing what she could, but they all knew it was serious. Wade was 67 years old and his body was tired. Tessa rarely left his bedside during those final weeks. She read to him, talked about their life together, held his hand. Their children visited, bringing grandchildren to say goodbye. Lucy came from Helena and stayed, helping Tessa care for her uncle-turned-father. On a warm May afternoon, with the windows open and the smell of spring flowers drifting in, Wade squeezed Tessa's hand. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice weak, "for saying yes, for taking a chance on a broken rancher with a broken heart." "You were never broken," Tessa said through her tears. "You were perfect. You are perfect, and I'd say yes again 1,000 times. Love you. Always." "Always," she echoed. He died peacefully a few hours later with Tessa holding his hand and all their children gathered around him. Tessa felt her heart shatter, but also felt profound gratitude that they'd had so many years together, that he'd died at home surrounded by love. The funeral was massive, attended by people from all over Montana. Wade had been respected and loved, a pillar of the community. But as Tessa stood at his graveside, she knew that his greatest legacy wasn't the successful ranch or his standing in the community. It was the family he'd built, the love he'd given, the life he'd created. The months after Wade's death were difficult. Tessa moved through them in a fog, supported by her children and grandchildren. Will and Anna took over the ranch completely, and Tessa was grateful not to have that burden. Lucy stayed for several months, and the two women found comfort in each other's company. They'd both lost the men they loved, and they understood each other's grief. "He loved you so much," Lucy said one evening as they sat on the porch. "From the moment he saw you, he was different. You brought him back to life." "He did the same for me," Tessa said. Slowly, Tessa began to find her way forward. She threw herself into teaching, taking on more students. She spent time with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, passing on stories of their grandfather. She worked in the garden Wade had helped her plant years ago, finding peace in the rhythmic work. Julia moved back to the ranch for a while, worried about her mother. But Tessa assured her she was fine, that she was sad but not broken. "Your father and I had 38 years together," she told her daughter. "Some people never get that. I'm grateful for every day we had." Thomas married in 1914, a quiet musician like himself, and they settled in Bozeman. The wedding was bittersweet, joyful but marked by Wade's absence. As 1915 arrived, Tessa was 62 years old, a widow but surrounded by family and purpose. The ranch continued to thrive under Will's management. Julia's veterinary practice was successful. Thomas was happy with his music and his wife. Lucy had recovered from her own husband's death and was enjoying her grandchildren. Tessa continued teaching until 1918, when she finally retired at 65. She taught for over 40 years, educated hundreds of students, and made a real difference in her community. The town held a ceremony in her honor, and the school board named the library after her. She spent her later years at the ranch, helping Anna with the household, playing with great-grandchildren and tending her garden. She wrote down her memories, creating a family history for future generations. In 1920, as she sat on the porch watching Will work with his own son, now grown and learning the ranching business, Tessa thought about the journey that had brought her here. From Boston to Montana, from disgraced and alone to beloved matriarch of a large family. She thought about the bullet that had changed everything, about Wade carrying her to safety, about falling in love in this wild, beautiful place. "I can't be the woman you need," she told him through her tears, convinced she wasn't enough. "You're already the woman I want," he'd replied, seeing her in a way no one else ever had. He'd been right. She had been exactly what he needed, just as he'd been exactly what she needed. Together, they'd built something beautiful and lasting. As the sun set over the Montana landscape, she'd come to love as much as Wade had. Tessa felt at peace. She'd lived a full life, loved deeply and been deeply loved in return. She'd found home in the last place she'd expected, and that home had given her everything. She lived to see her great-great-grandchildren, to celebrate her 70th birthday in 1925 with a huge gathering at the ranch. Will ran the Three Pines with his sons now, and it was as prosperous as ever. Julia was training a young woman to take over her veterinary practice eventually. Thomas had become a renowned music teacher, training students who went on to successful careers. Lucy visited often, and the two women would sit together, remembering Wade and the life they'd all shared. Lucy passed away peacefully in 1927, and Tessa mourned the loss of the girl who'd become like a daughter to her. In the fall of 1928, at 75 years old, Tessa fell ill with influenza. Her children gathered around her bedside, just as they'd done for Wade 15 years earlier. She wasn't afraid. She'd lived a long, full life, and she was ready to rest. On a crisp October morning, with her children holding her hands and sunlight streaming through the window, Tessa closed her eyes for the last time. Her last thought was of Wade, of seeing him again, of continuing the love story that had defined her life. They buried her next to Wade on a hillside overlooking the ranch, their graves marked with simple headstones. But their real memorial was the family they'd created, the legacy of love and strength that continued through their children and grandchildren. The Three Pines Ranch continued for generations, passed down through Will's line. The family stories were told and retold, how Tessa came west and met Wade, how they'd built a life together against all odds. The love story of the Boston schoolteacher and the Montana rancher became legend, a reminder that sometimes the best things in life come when you least expect them. Years later, when Tessa and Wade's great-great-grandchildren played in the meadows of the Three Pines Ranch, they played on land that had been nurtured by love, built on faith, and sustained by the belief that two broken people could heal each other and create something beautiful. And in the quiet moments, when the wind whispered through the pine trees that gave the ranch its name, those who listened carefully could almost hear the echo of Tessa's tears and Wade's response, the exchange that had started it all. "I can't be the woman you need. You're already the woman I want." It was a love story for the ages, played out against the wild beauty of Montana, proving that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with a single act of courage, a willingness to start over, and the faith to believe in love even when everything else has fallen apart.